you're going to need to know what sexual dimorphism is. So, sexual dimorphism, the example, or it's not example, excuse me, the definition here is the occurrence of two physically distinct forms of a species based on sexual characteristics as well as non sexual ones such as body size. Now, what that means is the difference in body shape and size between males and females of a given species. So when you look at some of these examples in this slide, orangutan male is very large, almost 3 times the size as a female orangutan. Same with elephant seals and turtles, and even parrots that don't have very large body size differences have incredibly different looking feathers, and a male peacock is incredibly different looking than a female peacock, etc., etc. So, as a human, you might be sort of enculturated to think that there's an incredibly large difference between male bodies and female bodies of the human species. But when you compare us to all living species and species that are not living anymore, we just don't have a ton of sexual dimorphism. There are certainly animals that have even less sexual dimorphism, where males and females look very, very similar to each other. But humans are not terribly sexually dimorphic. So this is also the part where I'd like to introduce the idea of sex versus gender. These are used in popular media all the time, often interchangeably, but they are not the same. This is really important. Sex. The term sex refers to biological characteristics, such as chromosomes, internal and external sex organs, and the hormonal activities within the body. These are very difficult to change. Some people can still change sex with through hormone therapies and things like that, and you could be classified as a different sex. But they're mostly dimorphic, with the exception of intersexed individuals. That means that mostly sex doesn't take place on a spectrum. There are men and there are women, and there are a very small number of individuals who are something in between. They're called intersexed, where their hormones and their chromosomes are something in between, but not exactly male, not exactly female. But by and large, as a population, most human beings fall into the category of male or female. Gender is different. Gender is a cultural category, not a biological, scientific category. Gender is a cultural category and concepts related to sexually distinct bodies, sexual preferences, sexual identity, and sexual norms. So you could have a body of one sex that, and with a gender of a different sex, these things are not always related to each other's sex and gender. They don't always coincide. So gender, more so than sex, is easily changed, but this depends on the culture in which it occurs. Um, these days, it's becoming easier and easier in the United States and in other places around the world to change from one gender to the other. It's become more accepted and understood. It wasn't that long ago that that was incredibly difficult to do, and you were persecuted. Gender is much more fluid than sex, with multiple overlapping categories, right? There are some people that identify in very pansexual sorts of ways and very overlapping sorts of ways, where they take certain identity and characteristics and markers from one gender and the other gender, right? When I was in about your age in the early 2000s, there was an androgyny movement where a lot of people were dressing as neither male or female. It was an androgynous movement where people tried to look and display no gender, which is interesting. Androgyny does still is still around, but it's not nearly as popular, or I just haven't seen it nearly as much. Also, more so than sex, sex is something that you typically just are. There wasn't anything that you did to become male or female. There wasn't an action that you took. You just were a male or a female, or an intersexed individual. But gender is performed. It's something you do, and because it's performed, it's also something that you can fail at. You can. You can try to be a man and not do it. You can try to be a woman and fail. Or obviously, you can also be successful. So in other cultures, there are other genders. In the United States, it's relatively recently that in popular media that we've recognized other genders. But around the world, third genders, fourth genders, fifth genders, and a number of other genders have been around for a very long time and have always been accepted. Um, the Berdache are a third gender that were found in American societies in which biological men adopted some of the norms usually associated with women. There are also sometimes called two spirits. This is a two-spirited individual. Eunuch is a gender category involving non sexual individuals that are typically men who may be castrated or merely celibate, sterile, or lacking sexual desire. Um, Eunuchs are something that have a long history in European society. Typically, they would castrate a boy, at a young age, so that when he grew up, he would still be able to sing with a very high voice, and they were used in choirs. They would also use eunuchs as servants to look after harems of kings and queens, or kings rather, so they wouldn't be having sex with their partners. A Hydra is a third gender in India in which biological men renounce their sexuality, and often their organs. They usually castrate themselves and become socially neither male or female. So they're sort of in between, androgynous, and they have special powers. They're often street performers, and they become hired to perform different kinds of rituals and magic. And there's also travesties, which is an alternate gender role in Brazil, in which males take on certain physical traits and sexual behaviors typically associated with females. And many of them work as prostitutes. So other genders have a very long history throughout all of human history. You can find examples of third genders, and they were all more or less accepted, but they had different roles. Now, I don't need you to memorize exactly what a burdash is, a eunuch, a hydra, or a travesty, but I want you to know that those are examples of other genders and that they're configured in slightly different ways in all of these different cultures. In the same way that we're going to find out that male and female is configured differently in other cultures as well. Speaking of which, this is not going to be able to say this word, but it's a Fulani beauty pageant. This is a group of people in North Africa where men are the ones that are thought to be the beautiful, fairer sex. And so it's actually men who undergo and go through this beauty pageant every year. So I'd like you to watch this short film. Again, I've embedded it at Brightspace, or you can click on this link. But watch it and take a look and yeah, tell me. Well, I guess you can't tell me what you think, but maybe I'll have a discussion about it, right?